Okay, so this lecture is going to cover the reproductive system lecture. And I have in the beginning, placed in the beginning in this slide set, a section on mitosis and meiosis. So I'm not going to go over mitosis and meiosis, but I've placed these slides here to give you a refresher on what mitosis and meiosis is. And it won't be covered on the exam, so you don't have to know about the steps of mitosis and meiosis, but you should know that mitosis is the cell division that results in identical cells, and that meiosis is the cell division that results in the sex cells or the gametes. And these are not identical cells. These are going to be cells that have half the number of the DNA of the parent cell, and they're going to be different from the parent cell. Meiosis is the cell division that will produce the sperm and, of course, the ovum. So once again, these slides have been placed here to give you a review if you need to refer to it. Okay, but what I will go over in this lecture or in this slide set is a process of spermatogenesis, which is the formation of sperm, and then oogenesis. So let's go through it. So here is mitosis, and I have these steps here. You don't need to know them, but it's good to understand what mitosis and meiosis is. Again, mitosis results in 2 cells that are identical. Meiosis results in 4 cells that are not identical as the parent cell, and they have half the number of DNA, so that they can then be the sex cells, because sex results, well, sexual reproduction is the fusion of 2 haploid nuclei, or 2 nuclei that have half the number of the genes of the adult or the full formed organism. And so meiosis is the process through which these sex cells form. Okay, so this goes through all these steps. Again, this will not be on the exam. I've just placed this here. Now, the next chapter in this, or this next section in this lecture set is spermatogenesis. Now, I would like you to watch the screencast on spermatogenesis first before moving on. So if you haven't watched this, stop this recording right now, go watch the spermatogenesis, and then come back, because I'm going to not go through spermatogenesis in this lecture because I've already gone over it in detail in the screencast. Okay, so just briefly, spermatogenesis is this series of events that occur within the seminiferous tubules in the testes, and these events are what lead to the formation of mature sperm. Okay, so spermatogenesis begins at puberty. It continues throughout the life of the male, although the rate will drop, and also the quality of the sperm cells that are formed are also degenerate. And so it declines with age, and also, again, the properties of the sperm, the healthiness of the sperm, also degenerates with the age of the male. What do you need for spermatogenesis to occur? First, you need the seminiferous tubules, and tubules that are within the testes. This is where spermatogenesis occurs. And then you need cells that are outside of the seminiferous tubules, and these are called the interstitial or Leydig cells. I'm going to stick to just calling them Leydig cells. So what the Leydig cells do is they're going to secrete the male sex hormone, and that is testosterone. Okay, so androgen it means sex hormones. Then the male sex hormone is testosterone, and the female sex hormones are going to be estrogen and progesterone. Okay. So here are this is a good picture or a good diagram, and what you have is one testes that you're seeing here. Let me get my annotation out. I'll just use PowerPoints. Okay, so this is a testes, and if you were to make a sagittal cut, what you would see are these little sections, kind of like if you were to cut an orange or a citrus fruit, right? You have those little pyramidal sections. So it will look like that, and each one of these sections is going to have this highly coiled long tubule called a seminiferous tubule. Okay, so they'll have large coiled tubules, and they're all going to be sectioned off in their little sections. So they're called the lobes of testes. And each of these seminiferous tubules are then going to drain in this one region called the rete testes, right? This one region here. So empties into a collecting area. And from the rete testes, there are going to be tubules that are going to drain this one main area. These are called, so these out here, okay? And then these are called the vas efferents, right? Each one of these are called the vas efferents. They are then going to drain into, they're going to, well, drain into the epididymis. So the epididymis is this long coiled tubule that's going to carry all of the sperm that have been deposited from the vas efferents. And there are two different regions of the epididymis. You have the head of the epididymis and then the tail of the epididymis. The tail of the epididymis is from where the sperm are going to leave the testes. The head of the epididymis is where sperm cells are stored. Okay, so the epididymis is then going to lead to a muscle, a smooth muscle walled tubule called vas deferens. So you have here our vas efferents that are draining into the epididymis. Then you have sperm that are going to be stored in the head of the epididymis. And then from there, they're going to enter into the tail of the epididymis. And then they're going to enter into the vas deferens. The vas deferens are going to then move superiorly towards the base of the penis. And from there, you'll have the addition of seminal fluid. And so then you have the mixture of sperm and seminal fluid together. They're then called semen. That semen then is going to enter into the urethra, which is then going to exit from the penis. Okay. The contraction of this muscular walled vas deferens, as it says here, is going to, contractions of those smooth muscles is what's going to help with ejaculation. The vas deferens will empty, as I said, into the urethra, which is from the base of the penis. There is a gland at the base of the penis called the prostate gland, and the prostate gland is kind of like the toll booth that is going to decide or allow whether semen passes through the urethra or urine passes through the urethra. Okay, and I always forget that I have a bigger picture here, but anyway, here is a bigger picture. And that's all that you need to know about the testes. Okay, so then spermatogenesis occurs in 3 stages. The first phase or the first stage is called the mitotic phase. This is where you have lots of rounds of mitotic divisions occurring of the sperm stem cell. Okay, and then you have the next set of division or the next set of events. The next set of events are called a meiotic division. So the first stage is the mitotic phase, and then the second phase is the meiotic phase. This is where you then have the reduction in the chromosome number, right? And then this is how you will then have the beginnings of the formation of the sex gametes for males, which are then called the sperm, right? After those cells are formed, you then have a further maturation and packaging phase. This is where the sperm cells change in morphology. The chromosomes get packaged or get readied for transport within the sperm to then finally be ejaculated. That process, this last process, is called spermiogenesis, but we'll see that as we go forward. Okay, so spermatogenesis occurs in this fashion. This is the cross section of the tubule. So let me kind of give you a little bit of so remember, this was the lobe within the testes, right? This is the testes. And this is where you had the seminiferous tubule, all coiled, right? So if you were to pull out this tube, right, it would kind of just look like a, tube, right? It'd be a tube. Now, if you were to take this tube and make a cut and look at a cross section, this is what you would see. And this region here, right? This is, of course, the lumen in here. This region is what you're seeing here, okay? So this region, you can see that this is the lumen. This is the space inside, right? And so that region that's next to the lumen is called the adluminal compartment. The region that is further towards the top, this region here, is the basal compartment. Okay, so basal compartment, if we wanted to label it to make it simpler, A and B. So then this would be A, the region that's close to the, or away from the lumen, and then the region that's close to the lumen is B, which is the adluminal compartment. So spermatogenesis occurs from the basal compartment to the adluminal compartment. So please watch, make sure you've watched the screencast. I'm not going to go over this because it would just be overkill at that point. Okay. Just notice that these yellow cells in the background that you see here, those are the Sertoli cells, right? They're also called the sustentacular cells, just in case you were wondering what this is. Sertoli and sustentacular cells are the same thing. I just call them Sertoli because it's far easier to say than sustentacular. Oh, I forgot I had this here. So this is a great picture or diagram, or actually it is a electron microscope picture, but not electron microscope. This is a fluorescence microscope picture. So this is the tubule, right? And then these are all the sperm tails that you see within the seminiferous tubule. And so up here is the basal compartment. And then here, facing more towards the lumen, is the adluminal compartment, And so you out here on the very outer layer is where you find the sperm. So these are the blue, light blue, so not purple, but these blue colored cells. Those are the sperm stem cells. They're called spermatogonium. The spermatogonium are going to, the first phase is mitotic phase. Second phase is the meiotic phase, and then the third phase is the spermiogenesis, where the sperm are going to go through morphological changes and maturation. Okay, and this is the spermiogenesis that I was speaking of. You don't need to know all these steps or all these parts. You just need to know that the sperm cell looks like this in the beginning. It goes through this process and you finally have the mature sperm. So the mature sperm has a specific anatomy to it, and it looks like this. Also, okay, so the mature sperm has a specific anatomy and specific regions to it. So it has a head region. On the head region, there actually is a cap, which makes sense because we put caps on heads, right? So there's this cap that is called the acrosome. And the acrosome has within it hydrolytic enzymes, so that when the sperm is passing through the ovarian tubules and it gets to the ovum, the acrosome is going to be destroyed or it lyses, releasing the hydrolytic enzymes, which are then going to digest their way past the outer layers around the ovum to get the genetic material into the ovum. Okay, and then of course you have the head region. The head region has only within it the DNA, only has half the number of chromosomes as the parent male. And of course, it'll have half the number of chromosomes because it's going to fuse with an egg or an ovum that also has half the number of chromosomes. And you add those two halves together and you have one whole set of DNA genome. Then past the head is the mid piece. So the mid piece is going to have lots and lots of mitochondria because they're going to provide the ATP in order to move this tail. So swimming is accomplished by the moving of that tail, right? So the tail will whip back and forth, and that's going to propel the sperm cell in the opposite direction. And so the tail then is propelled or energized by the mitochondria that are in the mid piece. It's a good thing to know, or it's interesting to know, that the swimming doesn't occur until there is ejaculation. So when the sperm are moved from the rhestesses into the epididymis, within the epididymis. They don't move around. They're not, the tail, excuse me, the tails are not moving then. They don't move through the vas deferens. The only time they start moving and using ATP is when there is actual ejaculation. So what is ejaculation? That's the propulsion of semen from the male duct system, so from the urethra, right? And this is going to be triggered by sympathetic nervous system. Sympathetic nervous system is going to cause, in this instant, contraction of that smooth muscle around the vas deferens. That contraction is going to, of course, cause pressure to go up, and therefore you have this ejection. What is semen? It is milky white in color. It can be sticky depending on the amount of sperm that's present, and it has accessory gland secretions, and these secretions are going to keep that sperm alive for the transport. So let's move this up. Let's talk about Sertoli cells. Okay, so those Sertoli cells are the same descendants of the sperm stem cell. Okay, but they remain within, they differentiate into these cells that make up that seminiferous tubule. So our Sertoli cells, they extend from, as you saw in the picture, from the basal end all the way to the lumen, right? So they go from the basal end all the way to the edge of the lumen. So they make up the whole width of the seminiferous tubule. So what do Sertoli cells do? They help maintain the environment that's necessary for the development and the maturation of something called the blood-testes barrier. So what that means is that components from blood don't easily interact or travel into the seminiferous tubule. And when we learn about the immune system, we'll see why, but mainly it's to prevent the man's immune cells from destroying the sperm cells. Okay, and so just like how you have the blood-brain barrier, you also have the blood-testes barrier, which prevents components from blood from entering into the seminiferous tubule and thereby affecting the developing or developed sperm cells. Sertoli cells also secrete chemicals that are going to then initiate meiosis. Remember, meiosis is the second stage, and meiosis is what's going to create those 4 haploid cells. So haploid just means cells that have half the number of chromosomes than the parent cell. And you need to have sex cells that have only half the number of chromosomes, because each sex cell is going to fuse with another sex cell, right? The female sex cell in this case, which will also have half the number of chromosomes. So together, those 2 halves are going to make one complete genome. Sertoli cells also support testicular fluid. So that just means the fluid portion of the semen. They also secrete a protein called androgen binding protein. So what does androgen binding protein do? Easily enough, it binds androgens. In this case, this protein is going to bind testosterone. And the reason why this ABP is necessary is because in order for spermatogenesis to occur, you have to have high concentrations of testosterone, okay? Actually, and close to the gametes. So you have to have testosterone sequestered within the proximity of these cells. So you have to have high amounts of testosterone built up within the seminiferous tubules. Now, the testosterone, as you'll see in a little while, is made by cells that are outside of the seminiferous tubules, around the seminiferous tubules, and those are called our Leydig cells. So, they're going to secrete testosterone, and testosterone, like any other molecule, will just diffuse away from a region of high concentration to a region of low concentration. So in order to keep testosterone within the seminiferous tubule, they release this molecule, or protein rather, called ABP, androgen binding protein, and it's going to bind the testosterone and keep it from diffusing away. High doses of testosterone is necessary to maintain the reproductive tract and also to stimulate meiosis and therefore spermatogenesis. So ABP allows for the concentration of testosterone, right? So the greater the amount of ABP present, the higher the level of fertility of that man. And with age, ABP production slows down and therefore affects the fertility of the aging man. Okay. Sertoli cells also secrete hormones that affect the pituitary gland. So Sertoli cells are going to produce hormones that travel back up to the pituitary gland. Specifically, it's going to be the anterior pituitary gland, and it's going to control the hormones, or it's going to influence the hormones that are released from the anterior pituitary gland that have a role in spermatogenesis. And we'll see what those hormones are coming up. Sertoli cells can also phagocytize cytoplasm that's left over from the spermiogenesis. Keep track of the difference between spermiogenesis and spermatogenesis. Spermatogenesis is the formation of sperm. Spermiogenesis is the maturation of those formed sperm cells. Okay. They also release a hormone called anti-Müllerian hormone, which prevents the this formation of abnormalities in the duct. Okay, you don't need to know more than that, at least not for our course. It also protects the spermatids from the immune system of the male by forming that blood testes barrier, which I spoke of. So here is a great slide here because it's a nice picture, easy to follow. So this is the lumen up here, and this is, of course, then the other end, right, which is the basal end. And so what you have in the basal end are the spermatogonia, right? Spermatogonia, spermatogonium for singular, spermatogonia is plural. The spermatogonia then go through mitosis, and then you have this whole process. Please watch the screencast. I'm not going to explain that here because it's just too overkill. What I did like about this is they shows you nicely the Sertoli cells, right? So number 7 are the Sertoli cells. Notice how the Sertoli cells are taking up the whole width of that 71st tubule. Okay. This is a great histology slide, so I'll go in a little closer, and you can see out here, darker, these are going to be your single row of spermatogonia. And then, so this is a basal end, and then this is the adluminal end, and this is the lumen. And these are all the tails of the mature sperm cells, right? That have already gone through spermiogenesis. Okay. Oops. Okay, we were here. All right. Next, we'll talk about the hormonal regulation of spermatogenesis. So the hypothalamus is a neuroendocrine gland within, or region, actually, region in the brain. We'll talk more about this when we learn about the endocrine system. But the hypothalamus releases a hormone called GnRH. GnRH travels to the pituitary gland. This is also part of the endocrine system. The pituitary gland has 2 regions to it, a region that is anteriorly placed, and then the region that's posteriorly placed. So GnRH, called gonadotropin releasing hormone, comes from the hypothalamus, travels to the anterior pituitary, and the anterior pituitary releases 2 hormones in response to the GnRH. That is called FSH, stands for follicular stimulating hormone, and LH stands for luteinizing hormone. Okay, so FSH, follicular stimulating hormone, it stimulates spermatogenesis, but does so indirectly because it's going to stimulate the Sertoli cell to produce our androgen binding protein. Again, our androgen binding protein concentrates the testosterone close to the spermatogenic cells, meaning the cells that are going through spermatogenesis, which of course is going to stimulate the spermatogenesis. LH is called luteinizing hormone. This is going to bind to the Leydig cells or interstitial. We can stick to calling them Leydig because it's easier to remember. Leydig starts with an L, LH obviously starts with an L, or luteinizing hormone. So luteinizing hormone stimulate Leydig cells. Where are these Leydig cells? They're in the soft connective tissue outside of the seminiferous tubule, and it stimulates these cells to secrete testosterone. When you have increasing levels of testosterone, well, you guessed it, you're going to have a negative feedback. So let's see what that looks like. Okay. So this is a great slide because it gives you a nice flow chart and you don't have to read so many words, but you have, here is, in this region is the hypothalamus. This here is the pituitary gland. There's an anterior portion and a posterior portion. The hypothalamus is going to release gonadotropin releasing hormone, GnRH. GnRH travels to the anterior pituitary, causes the release of FSH and LH. LH is going to travel to its target cells, which are the Leydig cells. These are going to be cells outside of the seminiferous tubule. Okay, the Leydig cells are going to release testosterone. In the meantime, FSH travels to the testes, right? And on the testes, you have receptors for FSH. The FSH and receptor binding together causes this, or works via this second messenger pathway. You don't need to know about this for this lecture. We'll learn about second messengers when we learn about endocrine. But the result of FSH binding is going to be the following. One, this is the Sertoli cell, by the way, right, in purple, right? So these cells are on the Sertoli cells for FSH, and they're going to, well, they're, yes, on the Sertoli cells. And then the Sertoli cells are going to produce all those products that we talked about, right? And they're also going to produce our androgen binding protein. Okay, so the Leydig cell produce testosterone. The Sertoli cells produce ABP. ABP is going to bind some of that testosterone and start concentrating it in this region around these cells that are going through spermatogenesis. So in addition to ABP, Sertoli cells also produce fluids that are going to influence or activate, rather, stimulate mitosis and then meiosis. So here this is our spermatogonium. The spermatogonium has gone through mitosis, and then you have your A and B cells, right? And then the A cell stays behind, the B cell continues on. First thing that's going to happen to that type B cell is that it's going to grow in size. Notice that the nucleus is larger, and then it is a primary spermatocyte. The primary spermatocyte goes through meiosis, and then you end up with 4 different cells. So here's the primary spermatocyte. It goes through meiosis 1, and each one of these, they're just showing 1. Each one of these then is going to go and finish meiosis, and you'll then finally have 4 cells. Okay. So this one is shown connected to these, but both of these are going to finish meiosis, and you end up having 4 late spermatids. Those spermatids are then going to go through spermiogenesis and finally form our sperm. So as testosterone concentrations increase, right, what happens is that testosterone is going to inhibit GnRH release, and this inhibition of GnRH is going to lead to the inhibition of FSH and LH, okay, which of course stops this process. But testosterone also inhibits LH secretion from the anterior pituitary, and so that is with increasing concentration of testosterone. As you have increasing numbers of sperm cells, the Sertoli cells are going to release a hormone in response to those increasing sperm cells. That hormone is called inhibin. So inhibin's got the word inhibit in it, right? So inhibin travels to the anterior pituitary and is going to inhibit the release of FSH, which of course is going to prevent ABP formation, which of course means it's not going to inhibit, it's not going to concentrate testosterone, so you're going to inhibit spermatogenesis. So there are 2 pathways that spermatogenesis gets inhibited via. 1, because of increasing testosterone, and 2, because of increasing sperm cells. So this is everything written out for you, all that I just said. So testosterone has other functions other than just promoting spermatogenesis and maintaining sperm healthiness. also maintains sexual accessory organs, also promotes muscle growth, namely skeletal muscle growth, again, helps create secondary sexual characteristics, so deeper voice, in more hair growing in the axilla and genital areas, bigger bones, right? Thicker bones. And it also has a role in feedback, namely negative feedback back to the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. So testosterone is a steroid hormone, right? So it's fat soluble, synthesized, of course, from cholesterol. It can activate specific genes, and that's why the growth spurts occur during puberty. This is when you have increasing levels of testosterone being released. Within the prostate gland, gets converted to a molecule called or a protein called dihydrotestosterone prior to the well, actually, you don't need to know about in the prostate part. In the brain, actually, testosterone gets converted to a female sex hormone called estradiol. And this female sex hormone, the estradiol, is necessary in order to bring about stimulatory effects. So it's kind of interesting that males need to have estradiol in order to have sexual arousal. Okay, so I'm going to stop this recording so you can just watch this independently if you wanted to make things a little easier. The next segment will be on the female reproductive stages. Okay. Find a way to stop recording.